Eleanor Whitmore had spent years building her empire, transforming a humble family diner into a national franchise. She had walked through countless boardrooms, signed contracts worth millions, and seen her name plastered on Forbes lists. But tonight, as she adjusted the worn-out apron around her waist and tucked a stray strand of hair beneath her borrowed baseball cap, she was just Nora Williams, a middle-aged woman desperate for work. The fluorescent lights of Whitmore's diner buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the cracked vinyl booths and the greasy linoleum floors. Eleanor stepped inside, the scent of fried food and overbrewed coffee wrapping around her. The place was bustling, late-night customers huddled over burgers and shakes, tired workers moving behind the counter like cogs in an overworked machine. This was one of her chain's highest-grossing locations, yet it looked exhausted. So did the people. She adjusted the thick-framed glasses perched on her nose and made her way to the counter. A teenage cashier barely spared her a glance as he shouted, "Victor, new hires here." His voice held no warmth, no welcome, just routine. From the back office, a man emerged, his presence commanding the space before he even spoke. Victor Gaines. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a crisp white shirt stretched over a chest that had once been muscle, but had softened with time. His red tie was knotted, so tight it looked like it might choke him, yet he carried himself like a man who did the choking. Victor's gaze swept over Eleanor, assessing, dismissing. "You're the new dishwasher?" Eleanor nodded, keeping her expression meek. "Yes, sir. Nora Williams." He snorted, unimpressed. $50, says you don't last a week." She said nothing as he turned on his heel, already losing interest. A younger waitress, no older than 25, appeared at Eleanor's side, an apologetic smile softening her delicate features. "Don't mind him," she whispered. "I'm Emily. I'll show you around." Emily had an easy kindness about her, the kind that couldn't be faked. As she led Eleanor through the maze of kitchen stations, pointing out where the supplies were kept and how to stack the dishes fast enough to keep Victor from barking, it became clear that she carried more weight than just her own. She filled in for missing shifts, covered for slower coworkers, and smoothed over Victor's sharp edges whenever she could. "You've been here long?" Eleanor asked, pretending to struggle with the industrial sink. Emily chuckled, wiping her hands on her apron. 3 years. Feels like 30. Eleanor noted the dark circles under her eyes, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she worked. "Why stay?" Emily hesitated before answering. "People need the job. I guess I try to make it easier." A sharp voice cut through the kitchen. "Carter, order up." Emily was gone before Eleanor could ask more. The hours dragged on, each minute exposing more of the diner's underbelly. Victor ruled with an iron grip, barking orders and docking paychecks over minor infractions. Breaks were a privilege, not a right. Customers were more important than employees, and anyone who questioned that found themselves swiftly replaced. Eleanor kept her head down, absorbing every mistreatment, every stolen tip. She gritted her teeth when Victor sneered at a busboy for moving too slow. She held her tongue when he made a cashier cry over a minor register mistake. But when a frail elderly man shuffled into the diner, his coat patched with duct tape, she found herself gripping the edge of the sink. The man hesitated near the counter, glancing at the menu like he could will the prices lower. Eleanor watched as Emily approached him, speaking softly. The old man shook his head, stepping back as if ashamed. Emily moved quickly, loading a plate with a simple burger and fries before setting it down at an empty booth. "It's on the house," she murmured, nudging the man toward it. Eleanor felt something tighten in her chest. Asterisk compassion, humanity, decency, asterisk in a place that had so little of it. Emily carried enough for everyone, but not everyone appreciated it. Victor stepped from his office just in time to see the exchange. His face twisted, a vein in his temple pulsing as he stalked toward the waitress. Eleanor tensed, hands gripping the dish towel so hard her knuckles turned white. Victor leaned in close to Emily, his voice low and venomous. "What do you think you're doing?" Emily didn't cower. He was hungry. Victor laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "And now we're a charity?" Eleanor held her breath as Emily squared her shoulders. It was a meal, Victor. One meal. The silence that followed was suffocating. Victor's jaw clenched, his fists curling. Then, in a voice that dripped with finality, he said, "We'll talk about this tomorrow." Emily swallowed hard but nodded. The old man ate his meal in silence, unaware of the storm he had unknowingly set in motion. As Eleanor scrubbed the last dish of the night, she cast a glance at Emily, who was wiping down the counter with slow, tired movements. She knew what was coming. Victor wouldn't let this slide. And Emily, she was too good to last in a place like this. Eleanor had come undercover to find the cracks in her company. She hadn't expected to find someone worth saving. The next morning, Eleanor stepped into the diner with a sense of unease coiling in her stomach. Something felt off. The usual hum of early morning activity was muted, the workers subdued, eyes flickering toward the back office where Victor sat like a king behind his desk. Even Emily, who always greeted the day with quiet optimism, seemed different, her shoulders drawn in, her hands moving in automatic, practiced motions as she set silverware on tables. Eleanor could feel it in the air. The storm had arrived. She took her place behind the sink, but her attention stayed on Victor. He was watching Emily, not the way a manager watched an employee, but like a predator deciding when to strike. The moment came just after the breakfast rush. Victor emerged from his office, his tie straightened, his smirk tight. He called Emily's name loud enough for everyone to hear. She hesitated, but only for a second before stepping forward, wiping her damp hands on her apron. Eleanor stopped scrubbing, her pulse hammering as Victor crossed his arms over his chest. "You gave away food last night," he said. Emily lifted her chin. "Yes." Victor's lips twitched, as if he was entertained by her honesty. Didn't even try to lie. "That's bold." "I wasn't stealing," Emily said, her voice calm but firm. "It was a meal. A single meal for someone who needed it." Victor leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make the moment feel suffocating. "And do you think this is your restaurant? That you make the rules?" Emily didn't move. "I think this place should have some dignity." The room went still. A busboy turned away, pretending to wipe down a counter. The teenage cashier hunched his shoulders, eyes fixed on the register screen. No one wanted to be caught in the crossfire. Victor exhaled sharply through his nose, shaking his head as if he found the whole thing amusing. "Dignity," he repeated. "You want dignity? You should have thought about that before you stole from the company." "I didn't steal," Emily snapped, and for the first time, there was anger in her voice. "I've worked here for 3 years, Victor. I've covered shifts, stayed late, put up with you. And I have never, taken a cent that wasn't mine." Victor clapped his hands together once, a sharp, mocking sound. "Well, congratulations. You just earned a severance package. You're fired." A gasp rippled through the small crowd of employees who had gathered, drawn by the tension. Eleanor stepped forward on instinct, ready to say something, do something. But Emily's sharp glance stopped her. It was a silent warning. Stay out of this. Emily wasn't pleading. She wasn't breaking down. She stood tall, her expression unreadable, as if she had expected this all along. "That's it?" she asked, voice quiet but steady. 3 years of work, and you fire me over this?" Victor shrugged. "I'd have fired you sooner if I knew you were such a liability." Something cracked in Eleanor then. She had known Victor was cruel, but watching him enjoy this, watching him savor the power he held over people who had no choice but to endure it, made her blood turn to ice. Emily unfastened her apron and set it on the counter with slow, deliberate movements. "I should have left a long time ago," she murmured. Victor smirked. "Good luck finding another job. I'll make sure no one in town wants to hire a thief." A flash of something flickered in Emily's eyes, pain, fury, maybe both, but she said nothing as she turned and walked toward the door. The moment she stepped outside, the spell broke. The employees who had been frozen in place turned away, pretending to busy themselves, as if acknowledging what had happened would make them Victor's next target. Eleanor stood motionless, rage curling around her ribs. Victor was already back in his office, satisfied, moving on like he had merely swatted a fly. She gripped the edge of the sink so hard her knuckles went white. This wasn't just about a meal. This was about power, about control, about keeping good people afraid so they would never question who held the leash. Eleanor had come here to observe, to see the flaws in her company from the ground level. But now she understood. There was no fixing this from the shadows. It was time to step into the light. The diner was quieter without Emily. The air felt heavier, thick with the unspoken knowledge that something unjust had happened, yet no one dared acknowledge it. The employees moved through their shifts like ghosts, avoiding eye contact with Victor, who strutted through the restaurant like a man who had won a war. Eleanor kept her head down, but inside, she was a furnace of barely contained fury. She had spent the night replaying the scene over and over, hearing Emily's steady voice, Victor's smug dismissal. It had been a test of patience, not to rip off her disguise right then and there. But she had waited. She had needed to see how deep the rot went. Now, she had seen enough. The moment the lunch rush died down, Eleanor untied her apron and marched toward Victor's office. A few employees cast wary glances in her direction, sensing something different about her today. She didn't hesitate as she pushed open the office door without knocking. Victor looked up, irritated. "What do you think you're?" He froze. Eleanor pulled off the thick-framed glasses and straightened to her full height. The meat dishwasher act was gone. Victor's face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He blinked, as if convincing himself that his eyes were lying. Eleanor took her time, letting the silence stretch, letting him feel the weight of his mistake. Then, in a voice far removed from the timid Nora Williams, she spoke. "Victor." She let his name settle in the air. "You and I need to talk." He swallowed hard, scrambling to his feet. "MMS Whitmore, I." "Sit." He obeyed without question. Eleanor closed the door behind her, then moved to stand across from him, her presence filling the space. "I came here," she said slowly, deliberately, "to see how this company was running, to see what our employees experience, what our customers experience. And I have seen plenty." Victor shifted in his chair, sweat beading at his temple. "Ms. Whitmore, if I had known." She cut him off. "That I was watching? That the woman scrubbing dishes and watching you intimidate your staff was me? Yes, I imagine you would have acted very differently." Victor's hands clenched on the desk. "This isn't fair. You can't judge my management based on one situation." "One situation?" Her voice sharpened. "Victor, I've watched you berate employees over minor mistakes, cut hours without warning, steal tips. I've seen you turn this place into a dictatorship, where everyone is too afraid to speak out because they know you'll make them pay for it." He opened his mouth again, but she wasn't done. "And Emily," her voice dropped, the rage simmering beneath every word. "She gave a man a meal that cost this company next to nothing. And for that, you humiliated her. You fired one of your best employees." Victor forced out a dry laugh. "She broke policy. You know how many employees would start giving away free food if I let that slide?" Eleanor leaned forward. "I know that a company is only as strong as the people who keep it running. And you've made them miserable, afraid, and that stops now." Victor's face twisted. "You think you can just waltz in here and undo everything?" His voice turned defensive, desperate. "You don't understand what it's like to manage people like this. They need discipline. You give them too much freedom, they'll walk all over you." Eleanor's expression hardened. "You don't lead, Victor. You control. And I don't run my company that way." Victor's eyes darted toward the door. He knew he had lost, but he wasn't going to leave quietly. "You fire me, and you'll be the fool," he spat. "You think this place runs on kindness? This is the real world, Eleanor, not one of your corporate boardrooms. Without me, this place will fall apart." She smiled then, but there was no warmth in it. "You're fired, Victor." His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he shot to his feet. "You can't." "I can." Her voice was calm, resolute. "And I just did." The finality of it hit him like a slap. He stared at her, chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, before finally realizing there was no coming back. A hush fell over the restaurant as Victor stormed out, his face twisted in disbelief, his usual swagger replaced by something smaller, weaker. The employees watched in stunned silence, hardly daring to believe what had just happened. For years, Victor had ruled over them with unchecked authority, his word absolute. But now he was gone. Eleanor stood in the doorway of his office, her presence undeniable, her posture commanding. She took a slow breath, then stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the staff. "You're all staying," she said, her voice firm but steady. "No one is losing their jobs. No one is getting their hours cut. Things are going to change, starting now." A murmur rippled through the group, a mix of uncertainty and cautious hope. No one had ever stood up to Victor before, and the sudden shift in power left them unsure of what came next. It was Emily who stepped forward first. She had returned after getting Eleanor's message, skeptical but willing to see this through. She studied Eleanor, searching her face for deception, for empty promises. "What exactly does that mean?" Emily asked. "How is this place going to change?" Eleanor met her gaze, knowing that the next words she spoke would set the tone for everything that followed. "No more fear," she said. "No more being undervalued, unheard, or overworked. This restaurant is going to become what it should have always been, a place where people feel respected, where hard work is acknowledged, and where kindness isn't seen as a weakness." The staff exchanged glances, some still hesitant, others letting hope crack through the years of cynicism. Emily folded her arms. "And Victor? He said this place would fall apart without him." Eleanor smiled, a quiet confidence settling into her expression. "Then we'll prove him wrong." She turned, walking through the restaurant with purpose, scanning every corner with new eyes. The problems were obvious now, the equipment in desperate need of maintenance, the schedule posted last minute, the exhausted faces of employees who had long given up expecting anything better. She faced the group again. "Starting today, wages will be reassessed. Hours will be stabilized. And there will be an open-door policy. If you have a concern, you bring it to me, and it will be addressed." A wave of energy pulsed through the team. The disbelief in their eyes began to shift into something else, something lighter. Emily arched a brow. "And what about me?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. "If you'll take it, I want you as manager." A stunned silence filled the room. Even Emily seemed momentarily caught off guard. She glanced around, as if expecting someone to object, but no one did. If anything, there were small nods of approval, a quiet agreement that this was the right decision. Emily exhaled a sharp breath. "You're serious?" "Completely," Eleanor said. "You stood up for what was right, even when it cost you. That's the kind of leadership this place needs." For the first time since this all began, Emily hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of the weight of possibility. "Okay," she said finally, the words settling into place like it belonged. "I'll do it." A slow ripple of applause spread through the employees. It wasn't loud or showy, but it carried something deeper: relief, approval, the first signs of trust in a system that had long failed them. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. This was what leadership meant. Not just numbers on a spreadsheet or policies made in a boardroom, but real, tangible change in the lives of the people who made everything possible. She turned to Emily. "Let's get to work." The restaurant wouldn't transform overnight. There would be challenges, obstacles, people resistant to change. But as Eleanor watched her employees, ** people, step forward with renewed purpose, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning.